Morning Talk with Siki Mgabadeli.
And it's 6 minutes past 9. You're listening to SAFM, South Africa's news and information leader. Well, we're having a discussion now about the attitudes and perceptions of other Africans towards South Africans and what may fuel them. Two of our callers, actually, Leslie in Middleburg and Ruben in Pretoria, on the open line on Wednesday, complained about the treatment that they received on the South African-Zimbabwean border, and also similar bad and negative treatment at the Zimbabwean and Zambian border. To be fair, we did have a call from a Zimbabwean who complained about conditions at the Zimbabwean border as well. But this also prompted more callers to phone and talk about how they faced hostility in other African countries as well, leaving us wondering if there might be some kind of hostility directed towards South Africans. What sort of attitude are we displaying when we cross our borders? Let us not forget the ill feelings that the attacks and killing of our fellow Africans called xenophobic attacks has also generated. So what could be behind the treatment of South Africans that they claim that they've received at the hands of our neighbors? And your experiences traveling on the continent as well. Do you believe that there is the perception that we are the bully boys of the continent? We're going to be speaking to a journalist who travels extensively on the continent, as well as a researcher at the South African Institute for Race Relations, and we'll take your calls on 0891104207, SMSs to 34701. After 10, we're going to be talking about an upcoming spelling bee competition for children. Then we're going to look at progress made or not on the recommendations made by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, speaking to the Department of Justice's TRC unit. At 11, we chat to the founder of the Juju fashion label, find out how sales are going, and we'll wrap with our good news feature with Stuart Pennington, who's CEO of the SA Good News website. So that's the program. Call us 0891104207. Send us an SMS to 34701. Those are charged at R2. You can email us at morning@safm.co.za or go to our Facebook page. That's Morning Talk with Siki.
Join me, Ike Patla, on the Best of Jazz here on SAFM, South Africa's news and information leader, as we celebrate our own music. Fridays between 10 and 12, and on Saturdays between 9 and 12 midnight. That's the Best of Jazz on SAFM.
What are you reading, my dear?
It's a book about African businesswomen, Daddy.
Oh, that's nice.
I wish I could be one too.
And you can, my dear. You are going to be a woman someday, and you will make your own life choices.
Visit your local health clinic to learn about the range of reproductive health and family planning services available, and choose what method works best for you. An HIV-free generation is possible. It begins with you.
Morning Talk with Siki Mgabadeli.
It's 9.5 minutes past 9 here on SAFM 104 to 107, talking about attitudes and perceptions that other Africans have about South Africans. What do we do when we travel on the continent, and what could fuel any negative perceptions that there might be out there about South Africans? We'll hear from you on 0891104207, SMSs to 34701. In conversation with Lerato Mokgatle, who is a print journalist, has travelled the African continent quite extensively, as well as Lucy Holborn, who is a research manager at the South African Institute for Race Relations. Thank you very much to both of you for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you, Siki. And maybe, Lucy, let me start with you. Do you get the sense that there is some hostility towards South Africans?
Yeah, I don't think this is the first time that we've heard about this issue coming up. I think it probably varies. Different people will have different experiences when they travel on the continent, and it will probably depend on what context and what people they meet and that sort of thing. Yeah. But I think at a macro level between countries, you definitely do get the sense in diplomatic relations and that sort of thing, that there sometimes is hostility towards South Africa as the sort of big shot country on the continent that often tries to place itself at the forefront of political and economic negotiations. And I think on the part of some other countries on the continent, there's sometimes resentment of that role that we often play.
Yeah, because there's a couple of issues. Obviously, there's the xenophobic attacks in 2008. I remember traveling to Kenya straight after that, and I wouldn't quite call it open hostility, but I was asked some very uncomfortable questions, and they made me think about the way that South Africans behaved at that time. And then the people who were asking me these questions, and they were ordinary people in a restaurant that we were meeting. And one of the things that they said is that it's quite a shame given the support that many other African countries gave us during apartheid.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think obviously the xenophobic violence in 2008, and actually it's been bubbling along since then, so it hasn't died down. I think it got a lot of coverage not only on the continent but in the whole world, and I think it got that coverage particularly because of South Africa's reputation as this country that had benefited from a lot of support on the continent during the struggle, and had progressed to democracy and values human rights and all of those things. So I think it was a shock to everybody, including South Africans, that this sort of violence could happen. And then it has created that reputation that we're hostile towards immigrants and that we view ourselves as different from the rest of Africa.
Yeah.
Often people say Africans coming in, but we're all Africans because we're in South Africa and we're part of the continent. But I think there is that tendency for South Africans to view themselves as slightly different from the rest of the continent.
Yeah, as if we're not on the continent.
Exactly.
Yeah. Lerato, you've travelled quite extensively. What has been your experience?
Look, my experience has been very pleasant through and through. Yes, there has been hostility, but the hostility was not based on diplomatic relations. One incident was when one officer at a
border, the border post? Were you crossing?
Block, at a roadblock.
Oh, at a roadblock.
That's the word I was looking for. When one officer at a roadblock went through my bags and wanted to know what a tampon was. He just had simply never seen a tampon. And we had a whole 30-minute raging session around it. And I said, look, it is what it is. Whether you know it or not, I'm not going to deal with that problem. Is that hostile? Does that mean Kenyans are hostile? No, they're not. I started traveling in 2008, immediately after the xenophobic attacks as well. I went to Senegal and 8 countries in West Africa. And I started around that time. And the one question I always got about the xenophobic attacks was, why are you killing your own brothers? So a sense of almost, yes, people were angry and hurt, but the anger was not, I'm angry at South Africa, therefore I will be hostile to you. Yeah. It was the anger of, how can people die like that? How long will we write our history using blood? And then I got a lot of people wanting to almost say to me, do you South Africans know how to be compassionate? Do you lack a national character of compassion and loving the next person just as much as, for instance, I could just arrive, and in many places this is what I did, just arrive without knowing anyone, without knowing where to go, and just look at the next person and say, hi, I'm Lerato, I'm new. Do you have an extra bed in your house tonight? Because I don't have money for a hotel.
And people took you in?
Yes, people took me in. So I absolutely do not at all believe that there is hostility. In diplomatic relations, yes, but that is not to be confused with experiences with other human beings, just generally interacting as humans.
And how were you traveling? Were you driving? What were you doing?
I was backpacking by road. So I flew from Joburg to Dakar, and then went by land all around, and then flew back using Accra. And East Africa, I just got a bus from Zambia all the way around East Africa and Central Africa, and then a bus back. And
you're in your conversations with people, whether you were on a bus or walking and meeting people, just describe that for us. What was the feeling and the attitude?
The feeling and attitude was in West Africa, people hold well, everywhere, I guess, people hold Nelson Mandela in very high esteem. They'll go, South Africa, oh, Mandela country, or Bafana, and mock how we just simply not win anything at all. At all, Bafana, national pride at stake, and would mock that. The conversations were not so much about trying to find ourselves trapped by diplomatic issues. It was about relating. You're a new person. Yeah. What can I learn from you? What brings you here? And I'll tell them, no, I'm just here. I just want to check out what the rest of the continent looks like. Okay, then you're welcome. Do you know this place? Have you tried eating matoke? Have you tried going to this nightclub?
And trying different experiences.
Yes. So it really has been for me and for I have 4 friends who travel extensively around the continent as well. They're not journalists, but they travel extensively around the continent, and we gather once in a while to just swap stories and experiences, and it has always been the same. We have a wonderful time. Yes, there are problems, make no mistake. I've had to flirt at borders. I've had to flesh a little bit just so I don't have to pay a bribe.
Yeah.
But when in instances like those, it is not something that happens just because you're South African. I have seen a Mozambican getting into Tanzania, trying to cross over to Tanzania, having to go to the side to pay that. I've seen a Guinea person in Mali being called to the side to just give a little money for cool drink. And someone who was recently, a friend was recently in Mozambique, and he says, he ran out of money to bribe at a roadblock. They wanted cool drink, but he understood that it is a general thing. You've had to bribe here. People have had to bribe here. So I think what people do not understand is that things do not happen to you just because you are South African. They simply happen, period. And not only that, they also happen to you in South Africa. What I have a problem with is that South Africans have an air of, I am a South African, I have arrived, be grateful. I've really met. There are 2 types of South African travelers. Those who leave themselves at their homes and they travel and they just throw themselves into things.
Yeah.
And then there are people who travel with arrogance and who live in ivory towers when they're out of the country. Oh my God, there was no infrastructure. Honey, is the infrastructure ematatiele? No, there isn't. So people I just feel that people must just get over the perception that South Africans are hated. They are not. They must also get over the impression they've given themselves, the hype of being a South African. We think we are the bomb. We are better. Therefore, when I go outside of South Africa into the rest of the continent, I must be treated as royalty. You are not royalty. You are like any other traveler, like any other person around you.
And Lucy, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I think that points to a really important issue here, which is that of stereotyping. And
Yeah.
we do it all the time,
Yes.
whether it's between different race groups or different ethnic groups within our own country or about people of other countries. And we shouldn't really be surprised if they might do it about us. So we may stereotype about people from various different African countries being involved in certain things, so crime or working in restaurants or all those sorts of stereotypes you hear around those sort of vaguely xenophobic views. And it may not be a surprise that when we travel, we actually find we're being stereotyped too as South Africans, just as, say, Americans are stereotyped as being quite pushy when they go overseas and arrogant and that sort of thing. They have that reputation. But as Leb was saying, at an individual level, of course not all Americans are like that, and of course not all South Africans are like that. And it actually does come down to the individual, how you choose to conduct yourself when you're traveling, how you treat other people when they're traveling in South Africa. All of that sort of thing is really relevant here.
And the question of aloofness and arrogance. Do you think that part of that is the fact that prior to democracy, very few South Africans, except for maybe those who went into exile, fled the country, had actually crossed crossed the border and gone into our northern neighbours?
Yeah, there may be an element there of sort of a lack of awareness of differences between ourselves and other countries, but also the enormous similarities that we actually share across the continent, and actually, all humans share.
Yeah.
And so maybe you're right that is an issue that many South Africans were deprived the opportunity to travel around the continent for either political or economic reasons. And now that we're able to do that, maybe people are experiencing it with a slightly different sort of view on things because of being deprived and because maybe their parents also won't have traveled, and all of that sort of thing definitely affects how you see other countries, and maybe it's not exactly ignorance, but a lack of awareness does contribute to misunderstandings and those sorts of issues that sometimes may come up.
In conversation with Lucy Holborn, who is a research manager at the South African Institute for Race Relations, and Lerato Mokgwatle, who is a print journalist who's travelled on the African continent, talking about experiences, but also talking about the stereotyping. That's a very good point that Lucy made there about stereotyping, but also talking about individual experiences. Are we arrogant? Are we aloof when we travel into other African countries? Do we think we're better? than everybody else. And how do we change that attitude? Share your experiences of traveling, crossing border gates and all of that, and how people have received you. Lerato feeling that, she was received very well, particularly when she was traveling through West Africa. But there were questions. Let's not forget those xenophobic instances. Just because people are not in this country doesn't mean they don't know what's happening here. It's all over the newspapers, and I can understand why there might be some ill-feeling if it is there. So we're going to take calls on 0891 104 207, SMSs to 34701. Let's take some calls then. Let's hear from Osborne in Cape Town. Hi, Osborne.
Hello.
Hi.
I just want to say that I was very pleased to hear that one lady mentioned the arrogance in this country. I believe that the South African government and the indigenous people, because of the rulers of this land, are incredibly arrogant. We have got it made. We forget the trouble round about the land, and that we are the rape capital of the world. Now, is it the people flocking in looking for asylum who are raping the people? Why is there this xenophobia? It's rampant, and the truth of the matter is, if anyone wants to employ a person, the Malawians, the Mozambicans, are a better bet than the South Africans. Why is that? We find no fault with ourselves. It is a great mystery to me, and it's a terrible thing to be in this milieu, which, it's not great. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.
Thanks, Osborne. What do you make of that, Lucy?
Yeah, I think there is clearly this sense that we may be too arrogant and so on. But I think, as Lebo points out, it is very much an individual matter. I think the caller's right at a governmental level. There has been, there have been instances of arrogance in the diplomatic field. The latest example is the nomination of Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma to be the head of the AU summit or whatever. And I think that was a very good example of arrogance, because we assumed at a diplomatic level that, okay, we're South Africa, our candidate will be favoured.
Yeah.
And we didn't actually take the time to go and gauge how much support we had on the continent and whatever. And we've had to now sort of re-propose her and go through that process properly. And I think that does show a sort of lack of sensitivity at the governmental level. Of course, that doesn't always apply to the individual level, but there is that stereotyping. And actually, your caller displayed it herself when she said, if you want to employ someone, a Malawian or Mozambican will work harder than a South African or whatever. Well, that's of course not always the case.
Yeah.
You don't know. It depends on individuals and their own attitude and their own histories and backgrounds and whatever else affects their behavior. And I think we have to all be really careful on a daily basis not to stereotype, whether it's along racial lines, national lines, gender lines, whatever it may be. We've got to always question those stereotypes.
On the xenophobic attacks, and I want to hear what Lerato thinks as well of what Osborne in Cape Town said, but on the xenophobic front, there were a task team set up to look at the reasons and underlying reasons. There was a lot of hullabaloo made in the media, and then we're still waiting to hear what the results of that is.
Absolutely. I think I think there were huge questions about how the authorities dealt with it. The sort of mainstream message that we got after that violence and any other violence that's bubbled up since has been it wasn't xenophobia, it was criminality.
Yeah.
There aren't those views behind it. And I think that is a shame, because we need to get to the root causes of it. I think there is quite a lot of evidence that at local level there were other issues at play, whether that was competition for jobs or different businesses competing or competition for scarce services and that sort of thing. They did mostly happen in communities where people are living under great strain in terms of their day-to-day lives. So there were obviously other issues, but clearly the people targeted were, on the whole, either from outside South Africa or were perceived to be from outside South Africa. About a third were actually South Africans, but because they were from the north, it was viewed that they weren't South African. So I think that the response of the authorities actually did set a slightly bad example in terms of not taking the issue seriously and wanting to get to the bottom of it, which might have helped to put a better message across overseas that we did as a nation really take this very seriously.
Yeah. Loretta?
I was just going to say there hasn't been action, and I do not expect any constructive action around the xenophobic attacks because, as with everything else that happens, there's a commission, there's papers, there's reports, there's people, but never really anything substantial. Number two is that there's also a reality, and that's another thing that the media seldom tells people. The communities of Fordsburg, Mayfair, and especially Yeoville, they have become the example of what South Africa is as an Afropolitan city, Afropolitan country, what Joburg is as an Afropolitan city. Zulu right next to isiXhosa, right next to Tsonga, right next to Kiswahili, to Lilanga, and everyone living in perfect harmony. So a sense of community created by people from various parts of the country, various parts of the continent, and everyone living as one. And then if people also knew, if we informed ourselves more about what happens in other African countries, maybe we would be a bit more compassionate and a bit more understanding, because if you understand the conflict in Somalia and the ongoing conflict in Darfur, where do you expect those people to go? People sometimes come here, or they go to any other country, fleeing, wanting to be free, wanting to walk out and go to a shop and not be bombed along the way, wanting to say, I'm going to school, and knowing that their child will come back. It is sometimes, I think, if we understood that, then maybe our communities would be a little bit more embracing as well. I'm not too sure about my facts, but I heard once on television, maybe 6 weeks or so ago, that there was a community that has said all immigrants must close their shops, and everyone who's renting out accommodation to immigrants must stop doing so with immediate effect. Things like that. When that happens, and you are speaking about people from Pakistan, people from Somalia, people from Sudan, even people who came from Goma in the DRC, do you understand the implication of not wanting to relate to people, not wanting to make people be a part of your life? For me, it creates two problems. One, people are forever strangers in South Africa.
Yeah.
They will remain strangers. Number two, there are first-generation South Africans who are South African Ethiopian, South African Congolese, South African Nigerian. What about them? Do they not have the same right to own this country and feel that it is home as everyone else?
Let's hear from Mzwandile in Joburg. Hi, Mzwandile.
Sigelelo, how are you?
I'm well, thank you.
I'm okay. I think one of the most important things is that we need to look at ourselves as a country. What is it that we want? The statement that was made by the lady before me, it's a very reckless statement, because that is what leads to people end up attacking other people. Because if you're going to come up and say we are employing these people because they're hardworking than you people, then there is something wrong somewhere, somehow. Those people are the ones who are making these people to fight. Excuse me.
Okay.
But I think having to look at at everything that has happened, we need to look at ourselves. I've always said one of the things that the government that never did was to rehabilitate the society. When we grew up under apartheid made it sure that when we perceive other African people, we perceive them as being poor. We as South Africans were better, even though we were oppressed, we were better than them in terms of economically and other stuff. So we still have got that mentality. Whatever was shown to us on TV, I'll make an example. You look at what was shown with the U.S. Everyone knows U.S. as this glitter place, and people don't know that there are shacks in U.S. But when they will show you the East European countries, they'll show you the bad part of the East European countries. So we need to come back and rehabilitate our people, because the mentality that they have, even somebody who's not educated in South Africa feels that he or she is better than an educated other fellow African person, because to him or to her, that is what was perceived to him.
Okay. Thanks, Mzwandile. I'm going to take Steve in KZN, then we'll go to headlines and respond. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Sigi. Thank you very much for taking my call.
Pleasure.
Just three very quick points. I traveled Europe, and I'm in my 40s now, so I traveled Europe in the apartheid days, per se. And the South Africans, particularly in London, were highly regarded as workers because we worked what was illegally at the time. I mean, we used to work 18, 20-hour days, and they loved us over there. So that's one point I wanted to make. But the other point I want to make is I've also traveled Africa a bit. And what I find in Africa is, unfortunately, the perception that I get with other African countries, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, etc., is that they perceive us as a cash cow. So when we go there, look, they love having us. There's no crime, very little crime against foreigners and stuff in those countries because of the income that we're bringing in to their countries. But they also sort of, he's South African, he's got money, he can buy this. That's the perception that you get, that I get in those African countries. And then just a very quick third one. I have a recruitment business.
Yeah.
And particularly in KwaZulu-Natal, a lot of the Zimbabweans that are coming out are incredibly well qualified, well trained. They've got an excellent education system over there. They cannot employ Zimbabweans here because the Zulu people don't like to work under a Zimbabwean, for example. Now, and that has been told me by numerous companies that I deal with on a recruitment level. It's almost as if they feel, well, like, I don't know, whether they feel like they're superior or whatever, or they don't want to work under a foreigner, but they'll work under a German or a Frenchman or an Italian, but the minute it's a person off the African continent that's not South African, they won't work under them. And I think that's a problem because a lot of those Zimbabweans really are well qualified, well trained, a lot of experience, but they can't get jobs here because the Zulu people, for some or other unknown reason, a lot of them in the companies will not work under Zimbabweans.
Wow. All right. We'll deal with that. Thanks, Stephen. It's interesting because that was also sort of the profile of the xenophobic attacks. You didn't hear of Germans and Swedes and Americans and Italians being attacked. All right. We're going to pick up on that. We'll take some calls as SMSs and tweets and Facebook messages. Vabakshini has your headlines.
Morning Talk with Siki Mgabadeli.
On SAFM 104 to 107. We'll take more calls. I need to read some tweets and SMSs and some Facebook messages. A tweet from Mututlehi who says, without traveling the continent, my experience of other Africans in South Africa has been positive, Zimbos and East Africans in particular. SMSs, someone says, is it Lewis, who says, it's the truth. Corruption is just too much at Beitbridge border on the Zim side. Zimbabweans need to change the police head. David Mtunzi in Mafikeng says there are instances where we display aloofness towards other African people. Fanyana says, Siki, I'm half South African, half Lesotho. I am a South African citizen. Hostile treatment that Maseru border gate treats Lesotho citizens is worth being investigated. Imeka says, why are they complaining? South Africa treated Nigeria badly at the point of entry in March. Lizo Mtata says, maybe not all South Africans are xenophobic, but I am sure all Ciskaians hate Transkaians. Hey, Lizo, that's another conversation now. Is it Tony in Cape Town who says, how do we treat other African people at our borders? Could this possibly contribute to anti-South African attitudes? And another one says, just listen to Jimmy Manyi, the cheek of the man, calling the Khoisan people over-concentrated in the Western Cape, arrogance at his highest level. And is it Tandi who says, why do you think all South Africans refer to Africa as if we are from another continent? And what is the impact of that on perceptions of South Africans? Nisani says, yes, there is a perception that South Africans think they are superior than other African people. Pick up Facebook. Frank Harty says, 4 years ago in 2008, 62 foreigners were murdered in a frenzy of xenophobic violence by South Africans. Thousands of fleeing foreigners were uprooted, their property burnt and their possessions looted. Even though seen by millions of people worldwide on their television screens, none of the murderers and looters have been charged in court for their crimes. And consequently, these days, foreigners and their property are still targeted in those areas where there are service delivery protests. Right. And Mapula in Cape Town says she was received positively in many African countries. Only in Nigeria did she experience bad treatment and bribery, especially at the airport. She's also tired of having to justify herself for being South African. Yeah, a couple of times I've had to justify myself for being a South African, so I know how you feel, Mapula. Let's hear from Mazondi in Mahikeng. Hi, Mazondi.
Hello, Sigi.
Hi.
I would like to say, Sigi, you see, xenophobic started way back in apartheid times, ne? And then this xenophobia was created by apartheid government. Listen to me carefully. So now we were conditioned to be like this because in apartheid times, there were people who were staying in their locations who would work in town. And then the other people would stay in the rural areas. That includes the farms of the white people. So now, you would grow on those farms and you will never get a chance to go work in town. But the people who are living in the location would hate us and call us stupid and all sorts of names. Yes? Now, it went on and on and on. People who were coming from other African countries, neighboring countries, we all in South Africa would think that we are clever than they are. And then we would even call those countries Africa, as if our country is not Africa. As if we are somewhere, maybe in Europe or where, I don't know. You see?
Yeah.
Now, what I say now, we were so conditioned that we feel this way. And then we as adults, we passed this thing onto our children. Now, our children, they should have been counseled, I don't know by whom. You see? Now, apartheid created.
Mazondi? All right, we've lost you, but I think you've made your point, and let me hear what Lucy has to say about that, because it's a point Mzwandile was making as well, and he was saying we needed to be rehabilitated.
Yeah, I think part of this is actually going back further than we've implied. There is a historical context here of under the apartheid regime how South Africa treated other South Africans, and that has set a precedent. I think also the treatment of authorities, so the question about how we treat people as they enter our borders from one of your comments there, I think is also relevant, that our authorities are perhaps not treating foreigners with the respect that they need, and that does set an example. If we see police treating foreigners as the sort of lowest in society with the sort of same way the police used to treat black South Africans under apartheid, you get the impression then that that's, acceptable behavior for the rest of us, and that's, because they're trying to come and steal our jobs or they're bringing crime, and it feeds those stereotypes. So we do really need to look holistically at how we treat foreigners in South Africa, and how that breeds attitudes among our own population who would like to think of themselves as tolerant, liberal people who aren't, prejudiced, but may be influenced by these sorts of factors.
And not only that, when we distance ourselves from the continent emotionally, and when we think of ourselves as being South African as a mere geographic coincidence, we are missing out on so much. The influx has changed South Africa in ways that were unimaginable to me when I was young and wanting to travel. I can now just walk out of the street. Next to my house, there's a spaza shop run by an Ethiopian guy, and I cannot say a word of Amharic, but I don't have to go to Addis Ababa to now finally taste what injera tastes like,
Yeah.
It's one of just the little things. Look at the little beautiful elements of life that it has added to our life. There's more diversity. It's more vibrant. We would experience it to its full potential if we stopped living in ivory towers. Even when we travel, I met a woman who said she was in Ghana and she stayed at a 5-star hotel, and she was very, very irritated that there wasn't one Ghanaian dish on the menu. And I said, well, that
you're not going to get it at a 5-star.
You're not going to.
No.
But if you get into a trotro
Yeah.
and you go to a corner, you will find a chop shop and you will find Ghanaian food. But she was not prepared to localize herself. People are not prepared to just step down from the ivory towers just 3 notches, right? And look for the things that connect all of us. You would be surprised.
Yeah.
You just discover magic. You discover how alike we actually are. And you also learn other things that do not necessarily exist as part of our national character.
And that integration and localizing ourselves when we travel, Lucy, I think some people, and I'm generalizing here, would feel freer walking the streets of Paris looking for a croissant than they would walking the streets of Accra looking for, what was it? You just named it. The local food.
Wachi.
Yeah. What do you make of that, Lucy? Because I think it's also a bit of a point that Stephen was making about the locals and his experience in the recruitment industry, where locals will not work with qualified Zimbabweans, but they're quite happy to work under a German or an Italian.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point that Lerato made earlier is really important, that maybe there is a lack of understanding about the circumstances that have brought foreigners to South Africa. Of course, there are many foreigners who come here just totally by choice because they are excited about the place that South Africa is, and we should actually feel proud of that. That's actually a positive thing that we can build on. But there are also many who have come here because they've been pushed away from their home countries under terrible circumstances and are really looking for some place of refuge, and South Africa, is a destination because of that reason. And we have to remember, in our own circumstances, if we were forced to leave behind our family, our friends, our home where we had been born, and go and live in another country, how difficult that would be, with all the language and cultural issues and that sort of thing. So I think there is a role there for South Africans to actually reach out and try and embrace those cultural aspects that have come with the influx of people from the continent to the country. And there are times when we actually have built on sort of positive things. You can think back to the World Cup when South Africa was knocked out. Every South African supported all the remaining African teams wholeheartedly. And suddenly we were all Africans, and our continental identity became really important to us. So I think, we need to build on those positives. We are aware of the negatives. We need to understand them better. But we also need to focus on the positive aspects of multiculturalism, of being part of the continent and integrated with the continent. And at a political and economic level, there are also huge benefits to gain from better integration, better trade between our neighbors, and all of those sorts of things. I think we can focus on to sort of turn this around.
All right. Let's hear from Tabiso in Krugersdorp. Hi, Tabiso.
Hi. Just on the question of xenophobia, I just want to state one thing without being prejudiced or anything. In 1980, if not mistaken, or 85, 1 million Ghanaians were deported from Nigeria because Nigerians said that Ghanaians were taking their jobs. So xenophobia is not a South African thing, so to speak. Understand? It's a global thing. It's an African thing. It is wrong at the end of the day. So the only solution here is those who come into the country need to integrate themselves, and we need to integrate with them. Because sadly, even those who are making businesses in the townships, they stay 300-400 kilometers away. They don't stay in the very same country that they're making business in. So for you to be a part of a community, you need to assimilate with that community rather than consider yourself a separate entity. That's when people start, you create this us and them kind of a thing. So sadly, that is the reality that we're having, whereby some of our foreign brothers who are coming are actually separating themselves from the very communities that come into, you understand? So what we actually need is, if for argument's sake you have cultural events from other African countries, or maybe, say, just to make an example, Malawians have a particular cultural event on a particular date. They tell the community that they stay in that we're having this particular event, can you come and just partake in this and have an understanding about what kind of a people are we? Instead, they don't do that. They actually remain as a separate entity, assimilating amongst themselves and considering South Africans as I don't know what. So that is one of the saddest realities. So foreigners need to assimilate themselves with the communities that they find rather than remain as separate entities. Then all this will end. Thank you.
I just want to respond to the caller saying that people come into communities and they do not assimilate themselves. If I'm a stranger, you are the one at home. You must welcome me. You must reach out your hand and say, hello, how are you? I do not expect a 20-year-old boy from Eritrea who comes from a very, very close-knit community and where everything is absolutely different to, say, my community, Komabopani, to come in and suddenly understand everything and suddenly feel welcome. Or to actively reach out, or when all he does is spend time in that spaza that he runs and then goes home. What I can do is say to him, how do you greet in your language? It's shalom. Then from that point onwards, I say shalom. Look at the smile that brings to people. One day, traumatize. I love saying traumatize them with 7 colors, instead of wanting to eat injera, just one day say, when it's over now, you hear, meet 7 colors on Sunday. Just do things like that. Yeah. Really, really reach out to people. It is very scary to be out of your home your own country, especially when you were pushed out. When you are pulled, it's very easy to jail. But when you are forced out, when you are running away from, be it lack of economic opportunity or war, when you feel that you are living from a space of desperation, it is very easy to become part of a community because you left out of fear. You didn't live out of a sense of adventure, and that is a lot of what brings people that's a lot of what brings people here as well, So we have to take that into consideration and actually reach out to those communities. It is Christmas time. This person does not have their family here. Why must they come to you asking you if they can be part of your Christmas festivities? You invite them. If they don't want to, you hold them by the hand. You're getting out of that shell. You are coming, and sorry, there's no tej. It's honey wine. Sorry, there's no tej, but here, you'll have ginger drink, and that will be the end of it.
Len in Cape Town, morning.
Hi, good morning. Hello all. I've been listening very closely, and a lot of the points that have been made this morning I agree with totally. One thing that I want to take issue with, a fool that phoned in and blamed xenophobia on apartheid. Foolish. It's total lunacy. Is he going to tell me that the Zulu Wars and the Xhosa Wars, where tribe killed tribe, was caused by apartheid? They weren't even there. If somebody is going to phone in and make a statement, at least make it worthwhile. Don't make ridiculous statements.
All right, thanks, Len. KGM in Cape Town, very briefly, morning.
I'm Gabadeli and your guest. Points that have been made, as the previous caller, are valid. But for me, I think the previous caller is a shining example of what the system can do to us. For as long as we're going to shift the blame and fail to take full responsibility of our individual and grouping responsibility of what we've done to get to where we are as a people, we're not going to get anywhere. We will have these cheap talks, and it will not change. If anything, it's going to exacerbate the problems that we have. In conclusion, we need to look deep into the systematic cause, which is still continuing, for Africans to have left Africa and African ways of doing things, be it culture, religion, and so forth, and adopting the Western norm, which obviously conflicts with the African way of doing things, which led to us today looking at each other in the eye and calling each other foreigners. For me, that is the point. If we can have a way of trying to resolve the issue of the system, I think we will have a way forward.
All right. Thanks, KGM. George in Ceres in the Western Cape, please be brief. Morning.
Yes, ma'am. Morning, ma'am. Those men, those foreigners, those who are coming in there in South Africa,
Oh, okay. We've lost George. I don't know what happened there. Leon in Pretoria, morning.
Hi, good morning, ma'am. I would just like to make one or two comments. One of them is, for as long as you're going to have, the type of influx that we have, specifically in the South African context, you're going to have a fight for the natural resources, be it water, sanitation, all those kind of basic elements to it. Now, one understands that if you're persecuted in your country and that makes you eligible for asylum in South Africa, there is merit to it. More often than not, there is not enough merit in all the people that basically comes from other countries. Now that, for me, the criteria of granting asylum is still not as it was supposed to be, and how is it enforced? Because what happens is, with the amount of people coming into South Africa, you actually start questioning the rest of the international community. We would say that, there was talks in a couple of years earlier on of the natural growth in the country is virtually half of that of people or immigrants, whether legal or illegal, coming into South Africa. That's a serious indictment on the South African nation in the first place. Secondly, on our currency as well.
All right. Thanks, Leon. That's Leon in Pretoria. We're going to read SMSs, check if there's any Facebook messages, and maybe squeeze in just one call, and then we'll wrap up our conversation. We'll do that in a moment.
Start your own business using tricks and tips from the Big Break Legacy. Have you ever dreamt about starting your own business? Of taking that great idea and turning it into a money spinner? Of working for yourself instead of grinding away day in and day out for a company that doesn't care? Then tune into the Big Break Legacy, Thursdays at 7:30 on SABC2. Watch 12 entrepreneurs compete for their chance at the Big Break and pick up handy tips that could take you one step closer to being your own boss. With a Nedbank Retail Savings Bond, you get a great rate of up to 8.1% per annum, guaranteed returns, capital security, and you pay no fees. But the best part is, you get a fixed monthly income for the duration of the investment term. Plus, you can invest for 2, 3, or 5 years from as little as 1,000 Rand. Invest today, hassle-free. Call 0860 555 111 or visit any Nedbank. T's and C's apply. We are an authorized financial services and credit provider. Make things happen. Nedbank.
In order to make it in the cutthroat world of fashion magazines, there is a common conception that image is everything, that hard work is overrated, and good looks will take you a long, long way. But it's a good job nobody told Betty Suarez. As personal assistant to the boss at Mode magazine, she's a woman on a mission as she navigates the shark-infested waters of the fashion industry.
From Poncho to Honcho, the second season of Ugly Betty, Sundays at 7:30 only on SABC3.
Morning Talk with Siki Mgabadeli.
One final call. Dumile in Pretoria, please be brief. Morning.
Good morning.
Hi.
My comment is that maybe to state the obvious, it's a very complex issue that we're discussing. There's an aspect of it that has to do with socio-economic, and there's an aspect of it also that has to do with the relations that African countries have with one another. I think that if there was a sense of social and economic well-being amongst South Africans at the level of community, we'd obviously be in a better position to be generous. And this is not to give excuses at all to disrespecting people's rights and to carrying what one perceives as justice outside of the ambit of the law. But that's obvious.
Yeah.
If you feel that you have something to share, you're more inclined to share it. But if you're coming from a background of poverty, it's very difficult to be accommodating for more.
All right.
And I think that's how people are going through now.
All right, I've got to move on. Dumile, let's read some messages. Facebook, Yusuf Musa says, great show, Siki. I'm listening. It's important to travel because you learn a lot of things. In my stay in South Africa, I have learned a lot. Thanks for that, Yusuf. SMSs. Sibo says it is anguishing that we Africans generally hate each other. And is it Boni in Babane says we have many embassies and high commissions in Swaziland. The South African office treats us like dirt. And Philip in Cape Town says people who commit these xenophobic acts are those who have never traveled or have no plans to travel. They make life difficult for fellow South Africans. And someone says, remember our first soccer game when we were readmitted into FIFA? We thought we were superior to our opponents, but were humiliated at the end. And Ste in KZN says, Siki, I was invited on Facebook by someone from Nigeria to be his friend, but when I told him that I was from South Africa, he withdrew the invitation. I'm confused why. Ben Yumba in Durban says, Siki, corruption at the border is all over the world. Once the police notice that you're a foreigner, they would ask you for money. And someone says people must just learn that there's no race, tribe, nationality that is superior. Superiority is an individual thing and not collective. Lucy, final word?
Absolutely, and I think the important thing to remember is this isn't a unique South African problem. Xenophobia and prejudice against people from other countries exists all over the world. I think at the moment it is possibly worse because of the economic strain and all of that sort of thing. So I think that is a real issue, but we as a country do need to address it and do need to address its root causes here.
Yeah. And it starts at home, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. It does. I just think people mustn't be turned off from traveling just because of possible problems, especially when crossing borders, I think ultimately the best advice I ever got was leave yourself at OR Tambo. Leave yourself totally there and let the destination, the people and the events that will unfold determine the experience, and you will discover that, as my friend Thapelo Mokgadi says, he's traveled a lot. He says when he was traveling Europe, it felt like he was in a museum, like he was at university writing his PhD thesis. And then he started traveling Africa, and he was a kid in kindergarten. It was just a world of possibility. Everything was magical. There's so much. Your senses just want to soak it all up. And that is exactly what happens. And attitudes that people have, like, oh, it is hostile, or there is lack of infrastructure, or there is that, all those things are just political. They have nothing to do with our daily interactions. And if we relate to one another based on laws that were written in Arusha and union buildings, when we're not involved in things we're not involved in creating, we are simply just going to miss out on amazing human experiences.
And Lucy, very quickly, on a diplomatic level, I mean, we were talking about the race for the AU seat, for example, and how we learned a lesson there. How do you think we should move going forward at a high level?
Well, I think we shouldn't take our place for granted in Africa, in the sense that other economies are growing, we have competitors on the continent, but also there are huge opportunities if we integrate better. Very little of our trade at the moment is with our neighbors. Most of it's with Europe and the US and increasingly Asia. So I think we need to look at the continent and look at our place in the continent at a diplomatic, economic, political level to make sure we don't take it for granted and we don't take our unique position in the continent for granted, because there are other countries coming up, and I think things are equalizing, which will bring enormous benefits for us, and we need to engage with that and play a role in the continent as a whole.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much to both of you for your time this morning.
Thanks again.
Lucy Holborn is Research Manager at the South African Institute for Race Relations, and Lerato Mokgadi is a print journalist who's travelled on the African continent.